call me Ivo. Should be much easier. Yep.
We're ready? Hey.
Hey, it's Alex Williams of the News Tech here. Here we are just chatting away. Here for another session from KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con, and I'm lucky to have with me, next we have Igor Dvoretsky, developer advocate with CNCF, Sarah Novotny, and I'm just going to make sure I get your title right, Sarah, Head of Open Source Strategy for GCP Google, and Michelle Norali, Senior Software Engineer at Microsoft, plus the co-lead for the conference here.
And keynote MC extraordinaire of the morning.
MC, that was great. There was a lot of news this morning about the projects and reaching these different milestones. And so we have Fluent D 1.0. What else did I see? There were several that had kind of reached. Prometheus reached
2.0.
2.0.
No. Container D.
Container D. Reached.
DNS.
Right.
CoreDNS.
Oh, CoreDNS. That's right.
So So my question is, like, take me through the mechanics of getting these projects to these places, because people are always wondering, why is it 0.18 or why is it 0.94? How do you really decide how to get it to 1.0, and how is that reflected in terms of the community that's part of these projects?
Can I jump in broadly
Yes,
to the
please.
community, and then you can jump in with the tech
Sounds
side,
good.
and you can kibitz all over?
Yep.
All right, so the community side, open source is one of those things where you can't just come out with a fully formed product, because it has to be, you have to have people working on it, and you have to talk to those people, and it has to be done publicly, and it's usually all in the open. And so the idea of having releases that are 0 point something are the pre-releases of, we're working on it, we've got an idea, it's starting to build the vision and starting to build the broader excitement about it, what the future vision is. But the idea is it's not necessarily completely polished. There are some bloody sharp corners on it. Oh, you can't even go over there. So we'll talk about that in the next release. And so in order to build the community around a community of contributors before you start trying to build a community of users, you have to have these releases that are public and early. And so that's the 0 idea.
Yeah, for me, 1.0, these major releases coming out, just as a sign of the community maturing. We're seeing people it's a sign of stability. Also, you have a major release, you're not going to have backwards incompatible changes. You're and that's really important, because these are components. They're a piece of the puzzle, and so people are going to build tooling on top of these components or integrate them into their own projects that maybe we haven't even heard about yet, which is really exciting. Yeah. And they need that kind of stability and stable API to grow successfully.
Yeah, just like to mention how it was with Kubernetes, right? Mm-hmm. When Kubernetes first appeared as an open source project in 2014, it was almost 0 project from the production standpoint. Yep. Almost nobody been using it for the real-time production as people do today. But Kubernetes community was built during the first year, and in 2015 Kubernetes 1.0 has appeared. It was the first really production-ready release of Kubernetes, but with already prepared community of people who are building it, community of people who are developing it, and community of people who are consuming it. So that's the major standpoint of having this 0.something releases and pushing forwards after that.
Is there any other significance to getting to 1.0? I mean, obviously, people think the higher the number, the better it is often. But
so the big
is there
one
pressure to get to that point, and how does that affect the projects themselves?
I think there's pressure to get to that point for comfort with users. So a lot of users, especially in larger enterprises, won't use something that is before a 1.0.
Right.
And 1.0 usually confers a stability comfort. It confers a backward compatibility comfort, as Michelle said, that we know pretty much how this is, and if you start making use of this feature or component or API, it's going to stay at least that way in your perspective. It may change on the back end, but how you think of it and how you use it will stay the same. So you can start building, as Michelle again said, the composable internet. You know, take this piece and that building block and the other building block, put them together and make something new and awesome.
And it's just like there's a process of like getting to know one another when you build a project and take it all the way to the 1.0, and you're kind of like getting into a groove. You're figuring out how to deal with milestones. You know, what is your roadmap going to look like? How do you actually put that down? And are you using a GitHub issue? Are you using a Google Doc? You know, what are you doing? And see, these are like also things that mature over the course of a 1.0 that I feel like a lot of people don't, or just, you know, it's just like it's such a in the background kind of thing. But as someone who uses open source technology, that's something I look for. I'm like, I want to know what your milestones are. I want to know how you label things. What is your roadmap? And then get familiar with that so that I can predict, you know, what you're doing, and also can see the history. You know, if you look like an unstable project with a bunch of like drama and stuff, like I'm probably not going to like, you know, use your product right this second. I'll just wait for a little bit longer and see how it dwells.
So that's really kind of part of what I was asking. Like, how do you manage these types of projects? You know, to keep them on track, right?
Yeah.
What are the practices required? Because these things don't happen by osmosis by everyone just contributing code.
Yeah, I think it's if you don't mind. I think these are like self-governing projects, and so really your goals are defined by your own group. And so I don't think there's at least the CNCF, from as far as I can tell and as far as I've been involved, isn't like going to be some governing like authority on your project or tell you have to get to this milestone by this day. They're there to really support these projects, and so it's really up to the project themselves to figure out what goals they want to meet and then do that in a consistent and responsible cadence.
Yeah, Michelle's right that every project is different, and generally what you find is the project governance and project engagement and even the processes are very influenced by the leaders who have the vision early on, so the people who found the project, then the people who raise their hands like in the next phase and go, I want to help and I have these skills, and then you start finding that you draw in skills or get support from an organization like the CNCF where you find you have gaps. So the CNCF offers services to the project, and some of the existing projects in the CNCF say, I would like some help figuring out my governance, because that's not a skill that they have. Kubernetes has gone and built out their own governance process over time and is evolving it, because the project itself is evolving, and the size and scope of the project and the teams and the groups working on it are evolving. But, you know, a project may not have marketing expertise in it, and so they can reach out to the CNCF in this case for that kind of help. With different projects that may not be part of the CNCF, say the Apache Foundation brings the Apache way. They're a little more strict. They have a path that you learn and you take and you accept. But as a founder of a project who has started something and wants to participate in the Apache Foundation, you have to take that on. There are also lots of open source projects who decide that they don't necessarily need a foundation and they're willing to guide and drive this themselves, and then it's very much on the founders and the leaders in the community to move this forward.
Yeah. So speaking about the CNCF role, right, as you've been mentioned, so our role is like the high-level governance, not driving the things that are happening inside the community, but we are offering services like marketing services, we're offering PR services, event services like with KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, and so on. But when I am as a contributor, I'm contributing something to Kubernetes or different projects, I'm wearing my contributor's hat, but not CNCF hat. So in CNCF, we would like to see our projects really self-governed, self-driven. We have lots of contributors in all our projects, lots of multiple companies that are contributing to these projects, especially for Kubernetes. We have the special interest groups within the Kubernetes community that, again, that they're self-driving, they're specific set of questions like some technical components or some group of questions like documentation, product management, release cycles, and so on. So that's the reason of success of these projects, because nobody can know better about these projects than these projects themselves.
So that leads me to some questions about Kubernetes, right? Which is the first project in CNCF, the largest project in CNCF, and the largest project, arguably one of the largest projects in GitHub overall. And there was a slide today in the presentation about Kubernetes with number 9 in terms of commits, number 2 in terms of authors, and number 2 in terms of issues. So I'm curious about the issues, which is number 2. That's pretty high, right? And then versus the authors, and then the commits themselves. I'm trying to parse those numbers.
So I'm not positive what the issues number is. If that is number of open issues, number of closed issues, it was open issues?
Yeah.
I look at issues as an engagement mechanism, and the fact that we have as many people as we do who are interested in opening issues, trying to make choices, and help guide the project is a really good thing. Kubernetes also uses issues for a lot of different things, and so some of them are very long running intentionally. So this is not necessarily an issue for a bug that may get fixed in a single release, but there are issues about how do we want to think about a storage interface, and that may last 4 releases while we work through the pain of it. So having lots of open issues means that we have a lot of discussion points and a lot of touch points and a lot of opportunity for the broader community to engage with us on the topics that we're just thinking about.
Yeah. So don't make equal issues to problem.
Right. Yes, that's what that. Thank you for summarizing. He's full of sound bites.
So it's like only GitHub terms. They have called this field in their GitHub interfaces issue, and we're using it for tracking some efforts. For example, we have features repo in Kubernetes community. So if you're going to propose some feature for Kubernetes, you have to open a new issue in terms of GitHub, meaning on GitHub repo in the features repo. But that's not the real issue, from the negative standpoint, right? That's your proposal. So that's really amazing numbers that we have these issues from the GitHub meaning, but they are really the number of conversations that are currently happening in the community.
Yeah. There's another metric, I don't have the most recent one on this, but we have some of the highest engagement on those issues as well, so these aren't sitting stagnant. The numbers that I'm remembering are actually, at this point, almost a year old, so I'm not even going to quote them, but we have an enormous number of people making an enormous number of comments on these issues, which then actually means that we have this huge engagement on them, as opposed to them sitting stagnant and ignored and sort of idle and dying. So we've got really amazing engagement from our community on this. People have opinions. It's great.
Right, and that's good.
Yep.
That's good.
Most of the time.
Okay, so with that then comes a lot of people trying to contribute, right? They want to contribute, and how do you? So I was actually talking to someone earlier about committing code, and when there's for instance, there's lots of vendors now participating in the community, and getting the code in is one thing, but then there's this process of rebasing, right? Where you're continuing to have to rebase because there's multiple people working kind of on that critical piece of code at the same time. How do you start to manage those types of issues?
So we've got a couple of challenges. You've kind of conflated a few things there.
Okay.
So let me tease one out.
That's kind of my job. So,
yeah. Okay.
So your job
I'll tease one out.
It's your job to separate it out and help explain it.
Fantastic. So as far as new contributors are being entree to the community and starting to participate, that is work that right now is hard. We're building a new contributor guide. We're doing doing work to make it a little bit easier to start and participate. Kubernetes as a project, as core critical infrastructure, is not something that is really suited for a flyby, small little contribution kind of work. So we're not optimizing for somebody who comes by and makes their first open source contribution a few times, maybe one or two. We would like long-term committed contributors. So what we are working on, there's a woman on my team, Paris Pittman, who is doing a lot of great work right now building a mentoring program that is that is working on taking people who have made a few contributions and then getting them to stick, getting them to grow from a couple of contributions to becoming maybe a reviewer, to become more engaged, and to become potentially eventually an approver or a code area owner, or get them involved more in a leadership in a special interest group, that kind of thing. So we're looking at growing the people that are coming to Kubernetes, but we're not necessarily optimizing for lots of new people coming in and just trying things out. Core infrastructure has to be stable by nature, and it is one of those things that's just hard. Now, documentation is a great place where that's a counterpoint. Having someone come in and fix a couple of things in documentation is helpful, is great. The user, a user may say, that didn't make any sense to me, but I finally figured it out, and if you wrote it this way, it would be a lot better. And so we're trying to have that contributor guide available and make it easier for people to make contributions like that. Now, you touched on rebasing specifically.
Right, and I think I'm seeing now how I was combining the two.
Combining the two. So rebasing is a slightly different problem, and we're looking at changing the way our releases are managed and our branches exist in order to try to minimize that, because that is a specific pain point in high-velocity projects that are managed on a single master tree.
Right, okay.
Did I say that all right? I have learned.
Yeah, so I just want to add here, obviously we're, by evidence of this event, we're scaling. That's going to bring its own challenges, and I think the community is not just, it's been, the discussion has been happening. Here we're scaling, there's a, how do we guide and mentor new contributors? Where does it make sense to put our efforts? Because, there's a lot of things that we could put our efforts towards. And so that's one thing, and we touched on the mentorship program, which I'm really excited about. There's a networking, a mentorship networking session at this event, which is super cool. There's also, we're looking at figuring out how to give a more defined framework for SIGs to kind of funnel the contributions in a more distributed fashion, in a more flat fashion also. So you're a SIG, you have this area code base that you work on, mentors should probably be in this SIG, and how do you take people who are new and want to come in, and how do you guide them and just do the pairing sort of type of thing to help them out. So that's something that's coming together. I think that's something.
So what are you thinking about doing to help kind of solve that problem?
So these are just top. So this is a topic that we're going to discuss with the steering committee. And so right now we're looking at a few other things, and this is on our top 3, I believe, right?
I think it's in the top three, yeah.
To figure out so that we can handle these scalability issues.
So functionally, as far as governance goes, we very much want to avoid Conway's Law in this, which is the organization and the project being intertwined terribly. You build your organization structure, or your organization structure is built around what your product.
Yeah.
So we know we have a distributed compute system, and we know we want to build this, and we know we want to break out lots of ecosystem spaces. But that also means that we can't really have centralized governance in a hierarchical fashion. So one of the things the steering committee is addressing is how to make sure that the different special interest groups, which own areas of code or particular sub-projects, have more autonomy. And beyond that, because they have autonomy at this point, they feel as if they have the ownership and the authority to make the decisions. And we're struggling with that right now. The steering committee is brand new. We just got it elected in October. And so right now there's been this little, and I'll talk a little bit about this in my keynote on Friday, there's been this tension between, well, we should wait till the steering committee decides. Well, no, actually the steering committee wouldn't decide this. We don't want the steering committee to decide this. You as a special interest group should decide this, and then maybe give a heads up, like, we're going to do it this way. And then if someone needs to weigh in, that's great. But for the most part, the special interest groups who own particular pieces of code should be figuring that out, because they have the local area knowledge, very much like Diane was saying this morning in the Netflix talk about giving the authority and the responsibility and the accountability to the person who is closest to the problem to be able to make the best decision for it. And we need to do that in a cohesive way for Kubernetes in order to scale this.
Speaking about the numbers, so for Kubernetes, we are not looking for the big numbers. We are looking for quality.
Yes.
But that quality makes us an amazing project with really big numbers. So quality makes numbers, not vice versa.
Does that create some? Then that forces you to be selective to some extent, doesn't it?
I don't know that selective of what? Selective.
I mean, you want quality.
Right. We
So-
want.
Yeah,
Quality
PR
is-
reviews on Kubernetes are very intense. so there is there is a process there.
How is it intense?
There's there's a lot of there's a lot of people have been in the code base for a long time, have particular ways of doing things in the code base. Just like not all Go code bases look exactly the same. Not all problems can be solved the same way. And so there's some, when you're a new contributor, there's some context that you may not have. And so people who are coming in will give you that context, which is really helpful actually. And then you can change your PR to kind of follow the same flow of that code base, or at least have some context when you're contributing code.
Is that codified to some extent, or are there some like silent rules of the law that you need to learn and like to get through? And
So in the mad growth that we have had, some of it is documented, some of it is documented poorly, some of it is really only in PRs, and that's part of what the mentoring program is actually being built to help, and also why we're rewriting and collecting together all of these disparate pieces of information into a better contributor's guide.
And just to add to that, there are some things you can't. You can always improve. So
You can
all
always
of these
improve,
things,
right? We will always
there-
improve.
Just from experience, there's some things you can't necessarily put in writing. If you start off your first week, right, at a new job as an engineer, then you're gonna spend that week just reading the code base, and
Right.
that's the experience I've had. I don't know if everybody else has had the same
And
experience.
learning the culture.
Yeah, and learning the culture. And so there are some things in the code that you can't really necessarily write down or teach. It's just something you just pick up. You understand the style, you understand the flow. You know the core values, the core rules and stuff, and then you just take it from there. There's a style, there's a flow, and that takes some getting used to.
so what are the core values of the CNCF and of Kubernetes?
Oh, that's two very
CNCF,
different.
Two questions
Those are
there.
two questions.
I'm doing the two question thing.
Doing the two
This
two
is like
question things, yeah.
a dual scheduler kind
Right.
of thing. But no, we can break them up. So what are the core values of the Kubernetes community?
So it's Sarah
Okay. So
about the community.
right. So core values for Kubernetes. Actually, we have a draft document that was begun by the Bootstrap Governance Committee. And we are going to be addressing that with the steering committee to make sure that we have something that is documented. But we've definitely got, stability and reliability, making sure that we are moving the project quickly forward, making sure that we are respectful and kind and helpful in our communities. It's a values exercise. Writing them into short, pithy answers is the piece we're going through now.
But it's the core. I mean, that ends up representing the core of who you are.
Yes.
And so how do you get to this point without those core values?
They are implicit at this point,
They're
and that's the
implicit.
problem. So I think you saw my talk in Prague, didn't you? When I talked about implicit governance leading to mistrust, and that's how we're
I saw
trying
it
to
online.
make it.
I wasn't there, but yeah.
Okay. We're working to move from this struggling space we were because of the growth, where we had an implicit governance, and now we're trying to make it an explicit governance. But that will take a little while to work through. And when the Bootstrap Governance Committee, the Bootstrap Steering Committee, pulled together how to get to an elected body, which we now have as of mid-October, we touched on all of these things. I think in one of our conversations at the Contributor Summit yesterday, we said every time we start to ask a question, we start unraveling and touching all these other questions. And one of the ones with the Bootstrap Steering Committee was we got partway through the values. We're like, well, if we're going to make these decisions, how are we going to make these decisions? They're based on the values. So there is a draft document that has just been begun, and it's on that list for the Steering Committee to go through, discuss further, bring it back out to the community, have the community say, does this feel right? And then have a broader discussion about it, and then actually publish them as our core values.
You know, like the car is moving really fast right now.
Right. Oh.
And there's, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say my favorite bit on this is I once described Kubernetes as I was hired to help drive this bus that somebody put a rocket ship on the back of, and now we're building wings. So this is moving really fast, and we are trying to improve the way we do everything. And in fact, this is one of our core values, was continual improvement.
And to add to your awesome metaphor, by the way, you know, you're like, we're also like changing the tires as your like bus flies,
Right,
like
right.
upgrading the tires,
Right.
painting the bus. It's
Right.
just like the metaphor.
But that's
can go on.
impossible.
I know. It can't be
But you did.
impossible because, you know, we're just going to have to find a way. And I think that's also like one of the themes that I've
So this
seen.
gets back to my question I have about the projects. Do you encourage them to have core values right from the start? Do you look for those core values from a, because like this can create a little bit of mayhem along the way, because if you're trying to like manage the ship, you know, as it's like booming along.
Are you
and
asking
changing
about
the tires
CNCF
as it's booming
project?
along.
Yeah, are you talking about the CNCF process or Kubernetes?
Well, I'm talking about, I mean, like you're
Broadly.
speaking to Kubernetes, right?
Right,
You're
yeah.
speaking to the Kubernetes and how it's like moving like a rocket ship, right?
Yep.
Every organization will have its kind of, will have a dynamic aspect to it, which requires from the, which you could argue is that that's what you have to do from the start, right? So from these projects, so let's shift over to the CNCF, right?
Right. Sure.
Now we're shifting over to the CNCF and the projects themselves,
Right.
Is that a critical part of the developing the projects now? Is that something you guys have learned, that these core values are really critical, to have in place as you start moving ahead?
So I'd say that's a couple of questions again. I think it is critical to projects. I think most projects don't have them codified in their early days because the culture is still evolving and they're still learning what their core values are. Node.js is actually going through a core value exercise right now, and it's been around for 15 years.
Wow.
Wait, yeah, 2009, 17 years. So there is a core value exercise that's happening in that community now. And there is, as you said, tension because some portions of a project may believe that different things are more core to their value system. The CNCF and the TOC in evaluating projects do not require that you have core values. They require that you have some model of governance outlined.
Yep.
In order to graduate. That doesn't mean you have to show up day one to the CNCF and donate the project with your governance model in place. It is a place to incubate and grow and learn and teach. So it's a space where the different open source projects can learn from each other, including core values.
Yeah, but having these values is the primary reason for the project to be successful. So if there are no core values, so like they're not well defined within the community, within the project itself, so this project won't be so successful as it could be.
There's also, I just learned this yesterday actually, so I'll share. talk to the TOC about contributing a project, you have to have like maintainers from different companies, which I think is a kind of a core value that's not stated as a core value, but as a requirement.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Making sure that we are across, making sure that projects are not single company controlled is a core value potentially, although not written as a core value of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation.
That's actually one of the lessons we learned at CNCF from other foundations and other experience. So having a project that is driven by a single company, so we have amazing vendors and amazing companies contributed to Kubernetes, for example, and to other projects, but having some project that is contributed and driven only by the single company means that one day this company can close this project entirely, fire every single person who is contributing to this project, make some significant changes based on the commercial politics of this company and so on. So we'd like to avoid it. We'd like every project to be maintained by at least 2 or more companies with major contributors from multiple companies or independent contributors and so on. So that's it. It's one of the primary major requirements for project to be gradated and be available as a CNCF project.
It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm learning a ton. And I think about a lot of these things right now because I think every organization, no matter if it's an open source project or whatever, has to think about their core values and what they reflect about you and what they reflect about the projects you're developing. There's a lot of other factors that go into it, such as is the infrastructure there to actually be able to like fulfill the values that you're trying to pursue. And I'm curious about, just in conclusion, as you guys move forward with the Kubernetes project or, various any CNCF project, that in development, how the infrastructure is going to have to evolve, right? Because GitHub was not meant for this, right? And that's just one example. I'm curious on what your thoughts are, as these communities continue to rise, because cloud native is quickly becoming the model for modern application development.
Not every project, though, will have the velocity and the numbers and the volume that Kubernetes does, and that will not make them less successful.
But I would argue that I'd argue this: if one company has this much data, right, in 2017, and the next level of companies have this much, and it goes all the way down to this much data, in 2027,
then they'll be higher.
It's going to be much higher across the board. And so you're going to have much more application development. You're going to have, this is a little bit far out, but I mean, we're already starting to see the breaking points in GitHub.
We've written a bunch of tooling for our size and velocity of project in order to help work with GitHub, because GitHub is the dominant place to develop currently. There are other options to do this, but we made an intentional choice to stay with GitHub and instead invest in the tooling to make this better for our experience. We found that other projects have taken a look at that tooling and are picking it up and potentially using it, forking it, making choices of their own to try and improve their development experiences. So I suspect you will see a couple of things. You'll see a lot of people making additional changes, additional tooling to help work within the existing paradigm as it is. And then at some point, as there always is in technology, there's going to be a step function new tool, and it will take 5 years, and we will all do something completely different, and it will be the new standard.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs, right? Yep. Like, there's always trade-offs. This is tech. It's just not everything's going to do everything you want it to. And so I really do like the contributor summits we have at every event. It's usually the day before, and you'll hear, like, okay, are we hitting a breaking point? Do we need to change something now? So it's good checks.
Continuous learning.
Yeah, and GitHub is not only the best place, it's the best place to develop something, not only from the technical perspective, but also from the social value, because GitHub is a real social network. There are multiple source control solutions in the world, but GitHub is a single place where all these people can meet each other at some place. Right?
We're going to conclude it there. I want to thank you all for joining us here, Sarah and Michelle. Appreciate your time, and been very insightful. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.